thoughts I cannot say to you. If I don't say the words, then maybe it's not true. And it feels alright when they come and say to you.
Good morning, welcome along to NUFC Matters. It is the Eddie Howe press conference review for the Bournemouth game, which is 5:30 kickoff tonight, live on Sky Sports. And first up for questioning was Reza from BBC Radio Newcastle. First asked Eddie Howe for his thoughts on the situation surrounding Christian Atsu, who of course is still missing in that horrendous earthquake in Turkey. He said it's hugely worrying. Thoughts were with him and the family. He was a great player. Obviously, he had him at Bournemouth. And just said that the conflicting stories have been a little bit confusing for people, but he hopes that there is a positive ending. He was also asked about Isak, whether he was fully recovered. He said, yep, fully recovered. We just had to follow protocol. There is no problems. And he's in the squad for today. Asked about the emotions about returning to Bournemouth. He said, well, it's the first return, but nothing's changed. I'm preparing for the game as normal. He said, it is difficult how I'm going to feel. It's difficult for me personally. He says, and it's going to be a tough game. He says, Bournemouth is a really special place when it is rocking. He was asked about the takeover down at Bournemouth and the fact that O'Neill's under pressure. He said, it's very important that when we prepare for this game, we don't look at what's happening there. We concentrate on ourselves. He said, they've got an athletic team. There's pace in the team. And he's sure that it'll be a tough game. Reza pushed him on the coaching staff returning there as well. And just a little bit about the coaching staff, was he looking to add to it? Because obviously he brought Graham Jones in, to a successful partnership that he has with Tyndall. He just said, look, we've been together a long time. Jonesy's been brilliant. He's been a great addition. He said, collectively we're a force, and that's how we described coming together with Tyndall as well, that they were a force, together. He said, we've learned together. He says, it's always been a very even partnership. The relationships never changed. Everybody has, strengths and weaknesses within the coaching staff. He says, but we've got a great balance. He said, but when he was pushed on whether he would be increasing it, he said, look, who knows? He says, analysis and data has become very important. Lots of things have been added to, football clubs now. And he just said, sometimes, we might need to bring somebody else in. Sometimes we might need to lose somebody, but, it's important to find the right balance. Keith Downey from Sky was next, just asked if there's any other squad news, any other injuries. He just said, not really. Manquillo is close to a return. Target isn't training with a team. He's training on grass now, but he's close to coming back and training with the squad. And Bruno, of course, is suspended. And he was then asked about Wembley tickets. How you're feeling about Wembley? It's 2 weeks away. He said, it's not even on my mind. The final's 2 weeks a game. There's 2 games. I'm looking at Bournemouth now. Then next week I'll be looking at Liverpool. Then he says the cup final build-up, well, that takes care of itself. He said tickets is the big word in the moment. He says, I've had a few phone calls and messages from numbers that I don't recognise asking for tickets. He said, he says, I can't help anybody. He also said that, he's just making sure it's not a distraction. He said he was desperate for tickets, actually. But he says, we'll be looking at that, in that build up to the final. Keith asked if his kids are excited about the cup final. He went, no, they're focused on their homework. He says, I've banned it from the house, which caused a bit of a giggle in the press room. Keith asked him about the Man City allegations about the 100 rule breaks with the Premier League. He just said, look, I'm loath to talk about other clubs and I've got no comment on that. Let the investigation take place and see what happens. Keith asked him about the news that broke about the Strawberry Place development, the fact that the club have bought the land back. And he said, how would he feel if the club extended the ground? He went, look, St James's Park is an unbelievable place. I've said that many times. It's a great place to play. Anything we can do to enhance it, I'm fully behind it. And, at this moment in time, I believe we'll sell the tickets. Andy Sixsmith was next, asking if he could talk about tickets. Well, again, a bit of humour there. He then asked about the cameras. The announcement that Amazon were filming an All or Nothing series behind the the scenes this year, this season, and he said, what's the experience like for you? He said, well, look, it's been a different season. We have had camera crews following us around, but the club have upped the ante on that kind of stuff as well. And he said, people do want to see behind the scenes. They're curious. He says, there are certain things within a football club, though, that you don't want out there. You don't want to be exposed, and things, at football clubs, some things have to stay behind the scenes. But he said, look, it's in the early stages, and yeah, no issues with it at all. And he asked how good it had been to have a break this week. Obviously, the last week it had the semi-final and then the West Ham game, and this week you've had a week to prepare for the Bournemouth game. And he went, good to have a breather. And he said, yeah. He says it was good to have a breather. He says we're disappointed that we didn't get a win against West Ham, and we've worked very hard this week in training to try and find that missing ingredient, and we need to get back to winning games, not drawing games. He was asked about ESM still splitting opinions, and he had a good run out, against West Ham. Eddie, again, good man management, I guess, just saying, look, ESM needs a consistent run in the team. All players do. He said, I thought some aspects of his game were good last week. He put a lot of effort in, and he then said, look, it's just up to us as a coach and staff and up to him as a player to get the best out of him. He said certain teams will set up to stop him. But he felt that, after last week's performance against West Ham, that ESM's certainly in a better place now. Asked about Eddie Howe as a Newcastle manager and Eddie Howe as a Bournemouth manager by Andy. Are they the same person now? Have you, he just goes, look, 99% of me is the same. He says, but ultimately with time you do evolve, you do change, you do act differently with experience, but ultimately the foundations of who I am and how I go about things will always be the same. And he then asked him if he knew about Joe Linton's baby gender reveal, which of course took place on the pitch at St James's Park. He said, I was aware of it. He says, but I wasn't sure of the scale. But he said, yeah, it was great. It epitomizes him as a person. He's family orientated, and when those blue flames came up, I was delighted for him, and it's a memory that his family will have forever. Somebody then asked, is the pitch okay? Which again caused a lot of mirth in the room. Nisha from BBC was next, asking about Anthony Gordon. She says, from what you've seen, this week, what's your thoughts on him? Has he settled down? Has he settled in? Sorry. And he went, yeah, look, the first impression you give the fans as a player is very important, and he really impressed the fans. He says he's taken that into training. He's very keen. He said they did some one-to-one work with him on the Monday, but he trained with the rest of the team. His performance levels are good, and very happy with him. Good addition. She then said, well, does that give you a bit of a selection headache? And he went, no, not a headache. He said, it gives you options. That's what you want. You want a big squad that you can choose from. And just said, look, that's the difficult side of management, but it's a one that I am, I embrace. Nisha mentioned that she'd heard on the radio about the cup final, about tickets, and she says it's really got a bit of a buzz about it. How are you protecting the players from that? And he goes, yeah, look, it's I am protecting the players. He says it is focusing on the Bournemouth game, and she basically then pushed on about a couple of talk-ins that you'd heard where somebody had said, do some players protect themselves so they don't miss the final, or do some players put their best efforts in so you can't afford to drop them? And he said, look, I like the latter. He says players want to secure their place. The best way to do that is to give their all in training and give their all in matches. She then moved on to Bournemouth, saying, look, they are struggling. Is it a good opportunity for you to get 3 points on the board? And he went, every game is that opportunity. He says, we want to carry on the momentum. We don't want a lull. We need to be positive. We're 16 games unbeaten, but he re-emphasised that it's going to be a tough game. Simon was up next from Tyne Tees. He said he'd been listening to a Bournemouth podcast, which said that he would get a better reception than the latest manager at Bournemouth. And he went, he says, the fans will support Gary and they'll support the players, and we need to start well. So he didn't accept that. Guy called David was up next, didn't catch the surname. talking about Manchester City and financial fair play. And he said, more or less just saying, look, from your perspective, you've been mentioning financial fair play. Does this really, back up your argument that you've been saying in all these press conferences? And he said, look, I've always said financial fair play is real, and it's certainly real for us. I don't understand how it fully works. I'm just led by those above. So simple answer to a simple question. He was asked whether Anthony Gordon was ready to start by David, and he went, yeah. Look, he knows the league. He's an experienced player. He's training well. He's a top. He's firing on all cylinders. He's ready to start if required. Ian Murta was next. Just asking, could you still have been at Bournemouth? Do you think could you have lasted longer there? And he just goes, look, in management, you don't have an infinite time in a job. Unless you consistently change players and you find success, eventually a manager changes. And his time at Bournemouth had come to a natural end. He then asked him what his perception of Newcastle was when he was manager at Bournemouth. And he said, look, my memories about Newcastle are always the games. And, I remember coming out to St. James's Park and thinking, wow, what a place to play football. He says, we won that game. And of course, that's my lasting impression of Newcastle. I didn't have any thoughts about them other than that. Miles from the Shields Gazette said, how important was that first goal after a goal drought for Callum Wilson? He went, yeah, look, it was important for him. But, I don't think he dwells on that. He just continues to do his best in training. You can hear his laugh every day at training. He's a great character to have. But, yeah, the goal was important, he said. And Miles also said that there's a lot of photos coming out from the club from training sessions where you see youngsters involved with the first team. How does that happen? And, and how do those players get selected? And he just said, look, each week if we've got a gap, we speak with Ben Dawson. We ask who should come up. He says Lewis Miley's done particularly well in recent weeks. So, yeah, that's how it's done, just communication with Ben Dawson. Lee Ryder said, conceding the goal against West Ham, did that strip away any anxiety that you might have been feeling about records, etc.? He says, personally, I had no anxiety. He said, of course, another clean sheet would have been nice. He says, but records and things like that don't play on my mind. The players were obviously, disappointed that they conceded the goal. But yeah, no anxiety from his perspective. And again, just said, look, we've been unbeaten since the Liverpool game. And we want to carry that into each game. It's about getting points. And we focus on each game, one game at a time. And again, reiterated that they're not focusing on Liverpool next week or the cup final against Manchester United. They're simply focused on each game, taking each game as it comes. Again, Lee asked him about the reception he's going to get at Bournemouth, and he said that doesn't trouble me, or I'm not thinking about that. I'm thinking about us, how we're going to play, and how we're going to get the points. He also said that the last time that ASM was at Bournemouth, of course, during lockdown, that he had 3 assists in the game. You'd love him to do that again. And he went, look, he is capable of doing that. He says, I remember ASM that day was very good. Of course, there was no crowd, which made it a weird atmosphere. Newcastle scored some good goals and they made it difficult for us. But yes, performance like that from ASM, I guess if selected, would be great. He then asked him a great question from Lee. And I often say on these programs, he doesn't get an opportunity to ask good questions. And this one was a belter. He just said, do you see Dan Burn as a centre-back out of position? And he went, probably at the start I saw that. Yeah. He says, Matt got ill and I had to play Dan in that role. He says, but now I look at him as a left-back. He says, of course, we were originally going to move him back to centre-half. But, he says, no. He says, from our perspective, we see him very much as a left-back now. We've worked with him, we've trained him like that. And that's what we see him as. Luke Edwards, again, just said, does the situation that's developing with, the report about Manchester City this week, does that develop a greater understanding of financial fair play for you? And he went, yeah, look, to a degree, yeah. He says, conditions we face, are different, of course. I don't know the financial ins and outs, but it does give greater understanding. But it is difficult to understand financial fair play when you're not in charge of the numbers and you don't look at the numbers. So, yeah, again, just point to the fact that he concentrates on the football and upstairs take care of itself. He also was asked about tiredness and fatigue, and that word's, been used quite a bit recently. And how does that make him feel? And he went, look, I believe that it's a state of mind. Anybody can go to the gym and you can change your mindset. You can go to the gym, you don't want to train. You can go in and say, come on, you kick yourself up the proverbial, And then suddenly you have a good training session. You went, you change the way you stand in the house, the way you sit in the house, the way you stand, maybe, or whatever, and you can change your mindset. So he said, for me, it's how the players, take on board what I say. It's how I speak to the players. But he said, believe me, there's no fatigue within this squad. Motto, he mentioned that as well, about not here to be liked, here to win. Are you taking that into the Bournemouth game? And he went, no, we're there to win. He says, not here to be liked doesn't come into this game at Bournemouth. Martin was next. He went, since you left Bournemouth, is your coaching style still the same? And he went, yeah. Again, it was a similar question what he asked before. He just goes, yeah, I'm in huge belief, change players on the, I can change players on the training ground. I can give them specialised attention. And he says the demands are greater at Newcastle than they were at Bournemouth. He says, and that's why I have to have a bigger coaching team, because they help take the weight off. But again, just going back to his coaching methods, he said, I like to specialise and help people and do one-to-one sessions, but I don't like to coach a player to the nth degree over a certain thing. And he says, and just give them time to take it in. He pushed him a little bit, Martin said, is that the favourite part of the job for you? When you went, yeah, when it comes off on a match day and you see a player develop or do something that you've helped them develop, he says, it's great. He says, but every player's different. Craig then, from the Daily Mail, Craig Hope said, wow, Eddie, listening to you, I don't feel tired anymore, which again, bit of humour. You went, did you think, did you feel at Bournemouth, when you left, that it was the right time to go? And he went, look, yeah, I'd reached the shelf life expiry date. That was an interesting way of describing it. He asked him if he felt helpless, and he went, that's a negative question. He says, I didn't feel helpless. He says, I didn't feel like I'd lost control. He said, that season at Bournemouth, there were so many reasons why we weren't winning games. He said, it was very frustrating. He says everything that could go wrong did go wrong. We had crippling injuries. Players, when they returned, weren't fully fit. He says then COVID hit, so we had no fans. And of course, the fans were a big plus point at Bournemouth, like the 12th man. He says we had the ghost goal versus Aston Villa. He says the whole thing, was a learning experience for me. But yeah, he says, you sometimes get those kind of seasons. Craig then asked about the prospect of the expansion to the ground. He went, look, naturally, I hope, that I'm still here. He said, would you still love to be manager when when that happens, if it happens? And he went, look, naturally, I hope my time doesn't come to an end as quickly. I want to do everything in my power to make the club strong for now and for the future. Craig said, is it part of the vision? He went, look, I'm not in charge of stadium plans, but obviously, I'd love more supporters to be able to get into the ground, so I'm a big supporter of it. Kieran was next, asking him how long it took him to feel like a Newcastle manager and not the Bournemouth manager. And he just said, look, the break really helped me. He says, I entered Newcastle United in a clear state of mind. He says, and having a break in between clubs is the perfect way to do it. So it didn't take him long at all. He was asked, again, just about building a dynasty. He built a dynasty at Bournemouth. Is he hoping to do one at Newcastle? And he went, I didn't plan to build a dynasty at Bournemouth. He says, but I wouldn't change anything I did there for a second. He says, and, again, at Newcastle, it's in the players' hands being able to build a dynasty. We can help them achieve, their aims, and hopefully we can build something at Newcastle. Part of the vision, I guess. Jordan was last up, saying, would you consider a change of formation? You've got some big players coming in like Isak and Gordon. Obviously they're not in not automatic choices at the moment. He says, look, I'm always open. I'm never closed off to formations. He says the media fixate on formations. We don't. He says we have kept this formation though because we've done very well with it. Jordan asked if Gordon had settled in. He went, yeah, I can only speak, about my dealings with him day to day, but he's very happy. We're very happy. I've enjoyed working with him. And then lastly, he asked about Dan Ashby. Just said he wasn't in the squad last week. Is he one for the future? And he went, yeah, of course. But he said, look, he's trained well. He's impressed us. There's a few things he needs to improve with his fitness, but from our perspective, certainly we're going to be keeping an eye on him. Big shout out to all the moderators and everybody in the chat. Good morning to Kevin. Good morning to Les. David John Cook, morning. Thank you. Good amigos last night, he said. Eddie is great, comes over so calm and collected every time. Les says Eddie's a stark contrast to the likes of Klopp and Conte, even Pep yesterday. He had a meltdown. David says, agree, Leslie, meltdown by managers don't help the team. Arteta's the same. Anyone got any idea how many tickets carried over to the ballot? It's an impossible question. Microphones for journalists need to be better, says David. Andy from Newcastle, about cup final tickets and loyalty points, why is the length of support and length of time season ticket holder not taken into account? I'm sure we'll discuss that tonight because we're doing a match day live. David says, I've attended Wembley to see Newcastle 3 times, previously season tickets first, then come first served, but that meant a queue for days at the ticket office. And lastly from Andy, I've been to Wembley 3 times and I'm in the lucky dip for tickets due to work commitments. I've only hit 2 cup matches, but I've been an uninterrupted season ticket holder for 25 years. There's going to be a massive debate, Andy, about this, I'm sure, when the season finishes. Been to finals, Charity Shield and Champions League nights, all because I was a season ticket holder and never missed all the extra games. I feel for those long-standing season ticket holders. Join us tonight. We will be live 5:15 to cover the Bournemouth game, as I'm not going to be there. So we'll be doing a match day live. Join me, George, Mitchell, and hopefully a few others on screen as we look ahead to the game and watch the game together. I'm going to play out with the ads. Take care. See you soon. Thanks as always to our sponsors, Skips and Bins, telephone 0800 25 45 25 3, email inquiries at skipsandbins.com, website skipsandbins.com, easy contract free and pay as you go waste collection. Thanks to Mr. Vicky's sauces, handmade in Cumbria. You can find them at mrvickys.co.uk, email info@mrvickys.co.uk or telephone 01768 210 102. Thanks to Blowhole Brewery. You can find them at blowholebrewery.co.uk. Beers brewed on the River Tyne. And thanks to United Group Travel Limited, UK Coach Holidays, based in Morpeth, telephone 01670 362 460 and mobile 07957 141 654. Graham, your driver, Beverly answering your calls, looking after you on your tour. Thanks also to 3 Property, who specialise in sourcing investment properties for their clients who are looking to invest in the North East. They offer a full in-house service from sourcing the deals to managing the properties for you. They've done over 100 plus deals in the past 12 months for clients all over the UK. Give the guys a follow on Instagram, matty.patter_northeast property and phil.reed_northeast property, or email phil@3property.co.uk if you're interested in getting a good property deal. Thanks to qtechshop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Wales and Newcastle, and the guys who run our website, nufcmatters.com. Thanks to Media Arts for all the help with the videos and the technology side of things. If you want to subscribe to the channel, hit the subscribe button underneath the video today. Hit the thumb up to like the channel and click share to your social media. We're also available as a podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and the rest. If you want to become a member, you pay a £25 one-off fee, and you can go to the website, nufcmatters.com, and find membership pack, or put your smartphone over the QR code, and it will take you straight there. If you subscribe, we do give you a free car sticker. All you need to do is email john@nufcmatters.com, and he'll post you one out. We also support the food bank on this channel, nufcfansfoodbank.co.uk. You'll find the match day bucket where you can make a virtual donation. We've also got some events coming up over the next couple of months. First off, we've got an evening with Steve Howe at the Tyneside Irish Centre, Friday the 24th of February. Tickets are available from our website, nufcmatters.com, and they are priced £15, not $50, as you can see on the poster. An evening with Nobby Solano is also at the Tyneside Irish Centre, Saturday the 25th of March. Tickets are £15. Book now at nufcmatters.com. And an evening with Frank Clark and John Gibson, Thursday the 20th of April, again at the Tyneside Irish Centre. Tickets are £15 and you book now at nufcmatters.com. Supermac and John Gibson will also be at Felling Cricket Club on the 16th of February. To buy tickets for that, contact the venue direct. We've got a whole host of t-shirts available from our website, nufcmatters.com. Gives you plenty of ideas for presents, for birthdays, anniversaries, you name it. Get your Anthony Gordon t-shirts and your Wembley t-shirts today.